The reason why we came up with this title is when you think about a lens, a camera, the more that you shift the focus or the frame, you can see the image clear. Or maybe there's a different way that you look at it. And so in this series where we highlight Black History Month, it's Black History Month, we want to look at George Washington Carver. And throughout this time, as we continue to grow in this series, we're going to highlight really incredible Black, I was going to say artists, producers, writers, and their contribution to our society. So Dr. Hunsinger is going to share, we're going to get in an open dialogue about George Washington Carver, and we're really excited to do this. So thank you, Dr. Hunsinger.
Thank you, Alec. So you may be wondering, okay, so why is John Hunsinger giving a talk on George Washington Carver? It's a fair question. A number of years ago, I was thinking about why do we have Black History Month? Why do we have Women's History Month? Right? I was just beginning, why do we have these months and these times that are set apart for reflection and thought? And as I thought about that, I thought, well, do you do anything with respect to that? You're part of the culture, right? This is something that our culture is doing. What are you part of the culture? If you're part of the culture, what are you doing with respect to that? And I really can't think of a lot that I was doing. So at that time, I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a biography of an African-American every February. And so last number of years, that's what I do. When February shows up on the calendar, there's a biography that I've thought, I want to read about that person. And I've started to do that. Last year, for instance, it was Eugene, yeah, right now I'm thinking of Eugene Saunders. Okay, so, okay, here, where's my cell phone? Okay. You need to know this. I was fascinated to learn that, and I had this man, Eugene Fuller, was the first African-American fighter jet pilot in history. He didn't fly fighter jets for the U.S. Air Force. He flew fighter jets in World War I for France, because he wasn't given the opportunity to do that in the United States. And so he had made his way to France, and he was a remarkable young man. He had proven himself in different ways. He met some people. He was able to get into the French Air Force. He learned how to fly planes. And so Eugene Fuller became the first African-American to fly jets or planes during wartime, but he didn't do it for the United States. And there's so many other things about his life that are very interesting. So a couple of things that you need to know. I don't really have a template for why I would select someone. I will say that I do tend to avoid personalities. I go toward those people that I don't know anything about. There's really just a blank page that I have. And George Washington Carver was one of those people. And you say, well, you didn't know about George Washington Carver? I did. I knew George Washington Carver and peanuts, right? I mean, that's what I knew. So that's pretty much a blank slate for me, because if I only know you because of one thing, then I really don't know you, because people are not just one-dimensional, are they? I mean, we're multi-dimensional. There are different facets to our life. And so it was George Carver, peanuts. And I thought, that's peanuts. You know, that's just not, I want to know more about that man. And so there are a number of biographies out there. I finally settled on the one that you see here by Christina Vella, and it's simply George Washington Carver, A Life. This is published by Louisiana State University Press. You can see it's just a couple of years old now. You can see I've marked it. When I read a book, I will mark passages, and we'll be looking at a couple of passages here together as I just walk you through. I've passed out, though, an outline of some of the things that I think we will discuss together in our few minutes here. I do this when I read a book. So let me be the teacher, and then I'll come back. So whenever I read a book, whenever you read a book, you should have a white paper or a white page, or you should have just one page in which you highlight the most important things about that book that you read. And you can organize it any way that you want, but you should do that for every book you read. One page, bullet points, observations that you make, and then you file that. And you will have that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, however many years, you'll have that available to you, because I'm going to forget some of the things I'm reading about George Carver. I'm going to forget those things, but in 5 years, I can pull this out. I think, you really enjoyed reading that, and you've been asked to give this message, and maybe you can pull an illustration from what you learned reading his biography. I can pull this out and see if there's something there that I might be able to use in a message that I'm giving or a teaching that I'm giving. So you can see here, though, that what I have done is I've given 12 statements or 12 things that I would say about George Carver. I'm not going to really refer to him as George Washington Carver. He was not born with that name. He gave that name to himself. When he went to college, there was another George Carver at the college he attended for a couple of years. He was a young white man, and so to distinguish himself from this other George Carver, he gave himself the name Washington. And it's really not clear why he gave himself that name, but he gave himself the name Washington. So George Washington Carver is the name that he gave himself, but no one referred to him in that way. People referred to him as Mr. Carver or Professor Carver later in life. And we'll touch upon why the title was so important. I learned something in the book that I had not known before about the importance of titles within the Black community, especially at that time. Did not know why titles were so important and why people would refer to them in one another. Even if you were a close associate or you were a friend of one another, you would refer to one another as Mr. or Mrs. or Professor or Bishop. Anyway, so let's just jump in. If I say something and you want to talk about it, ask me. Let's just make this a little. Let this be informal. Though I do want to get through a lot of this. I'm hoping that some of you will want to follow up. If I can get one or two of you to just think, I want to know more about George Carver, then I will have been successful. The library has a couple of copies on order. I wanted them to have it by this time. I went down and I checked, and the copies are not there. But so you can't run to the library and check out a copy like right after our lunch together. But there will be a couple of copies here within the next week, I've been told. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of George Carver, having read this biography, this is the only knowledge that I have of him. I want you to know I've not gone online. I've not done any kind of online search. I want to keep my focus pretty clean. There's a lot of information out there that you can get, but I wanted information from a source. Christina Vella, this is my source. And I was careful beforehand to check out the sources and who's written what. And I believe that she does a really good job in the book of presenting this man's life and within context and giving her own understanding of that life based on the information and the resources that she has. a gifted man. I did not realize. Again, George Washington Carver is a lot more than peanuts. He's a gifted man. You see there that I put an artist, a musician, a researcher, a teacher, an innovator. He was all of those things, and I'm not putting those descriptions there casually. I'm not calling him a teacher when he wasn't really a teacher. He was a teacher. I'm not calling him a musician if he wasn't a musician. He was. He could play any number of instruments at any time. And so he found himself often in his younger years, if he was at an event, some school event or some other activity, people would call upon him or ask if he would play the piano or play an instrument, and he would. He could sit down and play because he was gifted in that respect. An artist, you can see that in one of the sub points that I have there, that 4 of his paintings were submitted. They were selected. He didn't submit them. They were selected for exhibition at the World's Fair in 1893. Now, the World's Fair is not going to exhibit stick figures. They won't do that. And his love was for art. If he had his choice, if he could have selected to do whatever he wanted to do, he would have been an artist. The first college that he went to was an art school. And he loved being at that art school, and he was receiving a lot of affirmation at the art school. And he could have continued to be an artist, but he realized early on, with the help of some of the instructors who were at that school, that if he continued as an artist, as a young Black man at that point, his opportunities, his sphere of influence going forward in life would have been very limited. He had also shown at that time an amazing ability to be able to see the things within nature and to categorize things and to be collected. From the time he was a young boy, he would collect plant specimens, and he would organize plant specimens, flowers, seeds, and nuts. He would organize them into groups, into these different types of categories. So he was showing from a very young age this ability to see, to analyze, to organize, to describe. And when he was in college, his art teachers were encouraging him not to continue in art, that he would have a much bigger impact if he went into science. And so he did. He went into science. He turned away from art, though he would draw things and paint from time to time over the course of the rest of his life. You can see here, though, that as I put under it, gifted, the first Black man to graduate from Iowa State University in 1894. And then he got a master's degree in 1896. And it's very difficult for us because if you think about it now, that's 130 years ago. That's close to like 3 generations. You have to go back 3 generations to just put yourself into what that was like. It was extraordinary for this man to get those degrees at that kind of university in the field that he got them in. He was an expert in mushrooms. He wrote many articles in the area of mycology, fungi. He was an expert in fungi. You're thinking, okay, I didn't know that. Not an expert in peanuts? Nope, nothing to do with peanuts at this point in his life. Nothing at all. He taught microbiology at Iowa State. He was not a teaching assistant. I mean, he was a teaching assistant, but because of the extraordinary work that he did, he was actually given the title of teacher. He was teaching classes in microbiology and other sciences at that time. And Iowa State was not really integrated. He's the only Black person there, and he's teaching classes there at Iowa State in the 1890s. it's just a remarkable thing to think about that. He was elected to the British Royal Society in 1916. There are 8 foreigners elected to the British Royal Society in any given year, 8. And in 1916, he's one of the 8 from around the world elected to that society. There are only 40 within from England, from the British Isles, as it were, elected to the Royal Society in any given year. Maybe not that many, but that would be the maximum. 40 British citizens or up to 8 international people would be elected. And he was elected. He was nominated and accepted in 1916. In the back of the book, if you are just interested in some of the things that he worked on, the bulletins that he wrote, Tuskegee was, he eventually went to work at Tuskegee, and you'll see at the bottom of the page there that my frustration. So as I'm reading through this biography, I'm engaging with it. And I understand that my frustration is from a very particular point of view, but I am thinking to myself, why didn't you stay at Iowa State? Why? Because they had offered to pay him as much as any white professor. He wasn't going to get a lesser salary. He was going to get the salary that any professor would get. He was going to have his own laboratory. He was respected by the faculty who were there. What's interesting is this is a white faculty at that time. These were Christian men. They were Christian men. And when I say that they were Christian men, they would pray over the students who were coming. I'm talking about the faculty in the area of science. They would pray over the students coming into their program, and they wanted to convey the knowledge of God and the love of Christ to these incoming science students, because they saw their teaching of science as just one reflection of who God is. And so the science faculty, they wanted him to remain with them. And they were heartbroken. The portions of the letter that she includes in her book show how heartbroken they were when he said no. Now, they thought that he was saying no in order to go to Alcorn State to teach, because they had offered him a position too. When they found out that he was going to go to Tuskegee College in Alabama, they were just heartbroken. They were dismayed. They could not understand why he would do that, because Tuskegee at that point was really a secondary school. It wasn't even a college at that point. And they could not believe that he was going to do that. Why did he do that? Well, if you go down to about the 5th or 6th point, you'll see that in reading this biography of George Carver, he is passionate and loyal to his race. This comes across in several passages in the book. It comes across throughout his life and things that he would write or things that he would say. He wanted to help his race be raised. And he thought that he could do that more by being at the Tuskegee Institute than he could if he stayed at Iowa State. I'm just frustrated because I think he could have made such an impact more. And I'll tell you why I think that, having read this, it's like, I don't think that the people at Tuskegee really appreciated him as they could have. Now, that's changed. I'm talking about the early Tuskegee Institute. They did not appreciate who he was, what his gifting was, and all that he meant to them, or he could mean to them. Okay, so we'll get over that. Just give me a moment here. Okay, so let's go through some of these together. Eccentric. I don't know, I was sharing with someone in the last couple of days, I don't think that you can be gifted and not be eccentric in some way. And he was a gifted man, and so he was eccentric. And one of the ways in which his eccentricity showed itself is that he wore the same suit all his life. Let me read something from, you can see I've given you page numbers from the book. So in case afterwards, that's kind of interesting, I'd like to know a little bit more. I've given you page numbers that you could actually go and read from the book what I'm talking about, pages 52 and 53. When these paintings that he had painted were accepted for the World's Fair, he didn't have clothes that he could really wear to that kind of event. He grew up in poverty. And I'm going to read a passage here in a minute about how I think that's impacted, how she thinks it impacted him. And I think she's absolutely right. Any of us who've really grown up in poverty, not just modest circumstances, but real poverty, never really break away from that. You pull that, you take that with you throughout your life in one way or another, and he certainly did. She writes, okay, so here he is. He doesn't plan to go. He doesn't plan to have his art exhibited. He doesn't plan to go because he really can't afford to go, and he doesn't have anything to wear for that. And so a group of students, and not all the students were like this at Iowa State, but some of the students were. Students who just loved him. They took him into a department store and they bought a suit for him, so he had no excuse to go to the World's Fair to do that. That act touched him. He wore that suit the rest of his life. Anytime that he would go to any event at all, he wore that suit, so that by the time he's a middle-aged man and then an older man, he looks like a hobo. And he is invited to speak before all types of groups, including Congress, and he wears that suit, and it's coming apart. So it would be difficult to think of any material gift George Carver treasured more than that set of clothes, evidence of the hard-won love of his young friends. Famous suit gathered a long, honorable history as it and George aged. He wore it, and exclusively the rest of his life. It figured into a serious, okay, well, then I'm going to skip over this because someone that a young woman that he was growing close to, and they were beginning to have a relationship with one another, broke it off for two reasons. One, the suit. Yeah, he didn't take care of himself. He didn't present himself well. And two, he was, as you can tell by the picture, he was a dark African-American man. And she was a light-skinned African-American woman at Tuskegee. And what I did not know, and this was kind of a surprise to me, that at that time, in that particular context, that made a difference. That some of the faculty at Tuskegee were very light-skinned, and they could pass themselves off as being Caucasian, but others were not. He was very dark, and the relationship was broken off because she didn't want to risk people thinking that he being very dark and she being mostly white could be together. The pushback, the blowback that would come with that at that time from some people. And not talking about within the African American community, outside. If the white community thought you are you're walking with a white woman or you're spending time with a white woman, the blowback would be harsh. And so for that reason, she didn't want to experience that. And so one can't really fault her for that, but one has to almost feel dismay at the fact that that was a factor that played into the relationship that they did not have, because that they could have had. All right. So He always wore a flower in the lapel of his suit, as you can see in the picture here. He spoke in a grandmotherly voice. So you can see here. This is something for which he was distinct. It was distinctive about him. He sounded like a woman when he talked. And I had to think, okay, that's really interesting. Abraham Lincoln spoke, and Dr. Davis here is a Lincolnian. He's kind of an expert in Lincoln. He will tell you that Lincoln had a shrill voice, a very high voice. And yet whenever Lincoln is depicted in movies, he's got a Gregory Peck. He's got a manly voice. He's so like this. And George Carver had what people would describe as a womanly voice, a grandmotherly voice. And I wonder if at times as I was reading that, if that might not have taken the edge off of how some people perceived him because of that very fact. Yeah, he's a black man, but he has this voice, and that takes the edge off how some people might respond to him in different contexts. He was, and he remained a bachelor all his life. We will talk about that. You cannot talk about George Carver and not talk about how he may have been bisexual. I don't think he ever consummated that, but there are certain letters that we have that he wrote to a young man that I've got listed there, a young man that cannot be understood or interpreted in any other way than he was feeling passion for this person. Because I was kind of smiling as I read a couple of those portions. I thought, I don't even write letters like that to my wife. You know, it's just like, okay. Energetic. He was a prolific letter writer. He wrote everything by hand. Later, 1 minute, 10 minutes? Oh, okay. 10 minutes. We're going to have to pick up the pace, so please don't interrupt me. When he achieved a certain degree of fame, there were 50 to 100 letters coming to him every single day. And until the later part of his life, he did not have secretarial help. He did not have administrative help. This is one of the frustrations I have with the early Tuskegee, is that here this man recognized, gifted. There are people giving him attention that you would not think would give attention to a black man, and they were, and yet they would not help him build his laboratory. He had turned down a full position at Iowa State to work with some of the top people. Iowa State was the Harvard of agricultural learning at that time. It was the Harvard. He was going to be a professor at the Harvard of agricultural learning. And he said no, because he wanted to support his people. And yet the people that were there at Tuskegee kept, probably out of jealousy. You know, it's really hard to discern people's motivations and how they respond to other people, but not helping him, not building a laboratory for him. The microscope that Iowa State gave to him when he left as their gift to him was the only piece of equipment that he had for most of his life. It's beyond, you know, understanding. Am I conveying something of my frustration? Okay. I mean, I'm identifying with the man as a faculty member, right? Faculty people, they want support sometimes, and I'm just thinking, give the man some support. Look, he was energetic. He wrote letters. It takes time. When people wrote to him, he would write back. Now, eventually, in the 30s, mimeograph copies were being made of letters, and he would sign them. But even then, he would try to write a personal note on every single one of them. That takes real energy. It takes a lot of time. Yeah, he struggled with sickness. And I think the sicknesses, the pneumonia, the bouts of pneumonia that would put him in bed for weeks at a time throughout his life were because he strained. He answered every letter. He went to all these conferences. He was speaking to all these people. He was doing all of these things with very little help. And he felt like an old man when he was really a middle-aged man. And he would oftentimes in his letters refer to how old that he felt, how worn out that he felt, just because he was giving so much to other people. I've already touched upon the fact that he wasn't appreciated there. I don't want to say too much about that, but let me just read one passage. There was a particular person on the faculty at that time who really made life difficult for him. Okay. During the years when Bridgeforth was attacking him, for the ordeal lasted more than a decade, Carver preached to his students that they must repay anger with mildness. Now, this is not a white man. This is a black man. He's on the faculty of Tuskegee. So think of this plus all of that. That's outside that he's having to contend with. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Carver preached to his students, and he had these Bible studies that he had every Sunday night for years. But they must repay anger with mildness, that they must never retaliate against meanness and never allow themselves to harbor ill will toward their enemies, since harsh feelings would harm themselves more than their adversaries. If he were ever tempted to give in to loathing, pure and thrilling, it was during this period because of how there were certain people on the faculty who were undermining him. And I could give you example after example. One example, he was able to win for Tuskegee a federal research station. Does that mean I have 5 minutes? Okay. A federal research station. Those weren't common. Those usually went to the larger universities. Tuskegee got a federal research station. And there were those who would interfere with his research with the various projects that he was working on. So much so that he discovered that night he was having trouble with this one crop that he was trying to develop, or he was trying to engineer, say, a more healthy crop in one area. And he found out that people were going in there at night and they were disturbing the crop. They were, in other words, they were undermining his research because they were jealous of what he was doing. And it's just like, wow, why would you do that? So he was struggling with all of that. Underappreciated, yes. Appreciated. Einstein, to the University of California, said that George Carver was the second most skilled scientist of the 10 top scientists in America at that time. I'm thinking that maybe he was number one. Who's number one? Yeah. But Einstein is making that recognition. Passionate and loyal to his race for the natural world. He talked to plants and animals. I love this, Dr. Davis. He talked to plants and animals. And when people would see him doing that, when students would see him doing that, visitors to the campus would see him doing that, they would, what is he doing? He is talking to the plants. He's talking to the animals because he believed that he was at one with God's creation. Oh, and then he had a passion for Jim Hardwick. I'll let you, if you get a copy of the book and just read through, I'll let you. I'm running out of time and I don't want to spend my time reading. Okay. Somehow they met through the YMCA. They met because this young man, like so many other white young men at that time, they saw in George Carver something of an inspiration, and because of his involvement with the YMCA, which was a Christian organization then, they would just gather around him. And Jim Hardwick was one of these. He went to the University of Virginia Tech. He was a football player. He came from a fairly wealthy family. So Jim Hardwick. And so he's writing, Carver is writing to him. Somehow I love you all the more because you're having the struggle with his faith, with growing as a Christian young man. I love you because you tell me things I think you would not tell others. I shall reserve most of what I have to say until I see you. How I would like to see your face tonight so we could sit down alone with God and talk and pray together. I love you because your spirit is longing for freedom. When I see you, I will tell you what I saw in you when I put my hand on your head. Pray for him. Yes, I saw it the moment I saw you and loved you even then for it, and shall continue to love and pray for you. Don't let anything keep you from coming to see me. And he wrote this kind of letter. There are lots of examples. It's not just one or two. There are many examples. And then there's this one letter which indicates something of just the strong, maybe physical feeling that he would have for him. He was a passionate man. And I love, in some respects, I have a real regard for him simply because he did feel passion when he couldn't express that in so many ways because of the time in which he lived and the culture that he lived in. He couldn't express certain feelings. He had to be so careful almost all the time about how he felt about things. Because he did not like having to take trains to places where he would have several thousand people there to welcome him, to hear what he had to say, but he would have to ride in the last car of the train without any heat, without any kind of air conditioning, without any toilet facilities, without any food. He would ride on that. He would have to carry his bags from the station to wherever it was that he was speaking. When he got there, oftentimes he was told to go around to the back, and he would have to go around to the back and carry his boxes, his suitcases with all of his supplies and all of his exhibits up to the floor. He would speak and he would show his examples. People would applaud. They would stand and applaud for him. And then he would what? He'd pack them away, go back down the stairs, walk back to the train station, and go back to Tuskegee. He did that time after time after time. And you think he did not react to it, but it had to come out somehow. You cannot feel things and experience things without it impacting you in some way. And I think she seems to indicate that is one way in which just the strong feelings and emotions that he had about things going on around him came to expression. And Jim, and I would say that when you read some of the letters that Hardwick wrote back to him, he wrote showing a love for him, but a different kind of love, a love as for a father figure, for someone like a mentor, and appreciation for him in that way. I'm down to a minute. I think he's visionary. He endured many things because he always had his eye on a greater vision. So why he went to Tuskegee. So as frustrated as I might be with that, I really respect what he did, because the vision that he had was that through his work, he would raise the life experience of his people by doing that. It's why he didn't receive payment. Companies were willing to pay him for a lot of the experiments that he was doing and the different things that he was developing, and he wouldn't receive payment. You think, why wouldn't you do that? He didn't want to give the impression that he did this for money. He was doing this because he cared about his people. So he went to Tuskegee because he cared about mostly southern rural African-American people, but not just them. He cared about uplifting all kinds of people. And then finally, he's radical. He corresponded with George Pickett, who was a communist organizer in the South at that time. And you can't be too upset with him for that, because the African experience in the South especially was horrific. He experienced it. And so you have communist leaders coming in, and at least they're offering a different vision of what life could be like, and they're not showing the same kind of racial segregation and animosity that they experienced so much at that time. So he was a radical, and he corresponded. But he wasn't corresponding as a radical. He wouldn't think of himself as a radical. He would think of himself as a Christian who simply cared about helping people. And he didn't care if you were a capitalist or a communist. What he cared about was, what are you doing to help people? He was a correspondent with Gandhi. Gandhi, we have a way of looking at him today. At the time, Gandhi was seen as a dangerous radical, and they were exchanging letters at the time with one another. Gandhi had a huge respect for what he was doing in terms of all of these innovations that he was developing, that he was giving away for free to so many of the people at that time. I haven't talked about Booker Washington. That's probably a good thing, because I don't think that Booker Washington helped him like he could have helped him. And, there are a lot of things there about that I would have to read a lot more about Booker Washington to be able to comment on. I will just say that in the book, it does indicate that there was some impeding of George Carver's progress by Booker Washington and the administration there. All right, let me close with this. Penury, you can see there at the very bottom, penury is one life experience that is never forgotten. That penury, the word penury means grinding poverty. That's what penury is, grinding poverty. And he experienced that. I haven't talked about growing up. He experienced it growing up. He was a slave to a family, but they treated him like a son. They were really poor. They were, Mose Carver is the man who helped raise George Carver and pretty much encouraged his slave, his son, to study as much as he could, because he recognized that that boy had an ability that was remarkable for children. He didn't have an education. He couldn't do anything about it, but he would always encourage the boy to go to school. And so they would walk to school for several miles just to be able to go to school and then come back home and do that kind of thing, which we've heard about for other people. But that remained with him. That commitment to learning remained with him all his life. I would encourage you to read a little bit more about George Carver. I have a huge respect for him. I'm glad that I chose this book this month for just learning a little bit more about the culture of which I'm a part.
Thank you.